or historical conflict or ongoing war. And we are going to discuss this in a while with Andrei Kurkov. Pan Ukraine, please welcome. Pan Andrew. Haidar Hamzos from Pan Iraq. Nilofer Suhrabi, Pan Afghanistan. And Andrea Lesic, Pan Bosnia.
And this will be moderated by Germán Rojas, poet and president of PEN Chile. His work has been published in countries such as France, Honduras, and Puerto Rico. Rojas worked for 40 years at the UN, and he is now the president-elect of the Writers for Peace Committee. Warmly welcome.
Thank you.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here with you and these first-class panelists that we have today to discuss such an important issue like cultural rights in times of war and post-conflict that several of our countries, many countries indeed, are suffering today. I will start by introducing our panelists. First, Andrei Kurkov. He's an Ukrainian novelist and essayist who lives from early childhood in Kiev and writes in Russian, Ukrainian, and English. He's the author of over 20 novels and 10 books for children. His work is currently translated only to 42 languages, including English, Japanese, French, Chinese, Swedish, and Hebrew. Maybe I can help you with Spanish later. His books are full of black humor, post-Soviet reality, and elements of surrealism, and Andrei is also the president of PEN Ukraine. Second place, I would like to introduce Andrea Lesic-Thomas. She has studied in Belgrade and London, taught in London and Sarajevo, and written on comparative literature and literary theory. She currently teaches literary theory at the Comparative Literature and Information Sciences Department, Philosophy Faculty, University of Sarajevo. She is vice president of PEN Center of Bosnia-Herzegovina and also member of the advisory board of the Writers for Peace Committee today. Nilofer Suhrabi. She was born in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and currently lives in Norway as an exile. I live there also, so I can embrace you from my own experience and just to tell you that Norway is a great, great country, and try to take the best of that country in this experience. I wasn't not that wise when I was there. In 2017, you graduated from university and also completed your master's degree in the education sector. That's all. Nilofer has experience in teaching English, translating English to Farsi, and vice versa. She works voluntarily with Afghanistan PEN as head of research and translation unit, and also is the editor of Afghanistan PEN magazine. And in addition to that, she's teaching English in Norway. And finally, Haidar Hamzos. He's an Iraqi blogger and digital rights defender in Iraq and the countries of the Middle East and North Africa, and Treasury Secretary of PEN Center of Iraq since 2018. He has been involved in civil work early since 2004, after the United States of America occupation of Iraq, and his priorities since then have been to defend human rights He was one of the founders of the first free space for entrepreneurship in Baghdad and has been working for 10 years in one of the most important institutions defending digital rights in Iraq, the INSM network. Well, let me say a few words as an introduction to this panel, because as you know for the presentation that Ola did, this panel deals with cultural rights in times of war and post-conflict, and arts and culture, we say that, are frequently the first casualties in war. And after the war, they normally receive little attention, if any, when states transition into a post-conflict situation. Well, I would like to start by saying that conflicts are very diverse everywhere. And as you know, I'm from Chile, a country that suffered the imposition by military rule of a one-sided rightist dictatorship and a neoliberal ideology that has divided the Chilean society since 1973, almost 50 years ago. And the division still persists. Division that is expressed today between authoritarianism and democracy. Now, what happened in Chile was a very minor conflict compared with what we have witnessed in Iraq, in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, and in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In my country, only 15,000 people were assassinated, and 700,000, I would say, were sent into exile. Small numbers for other realities. But we're not speaking of statistics, we're speaking of human beings that were affected by the situation. And it was really, we're even facing a new situation of our own culture, and I assume that this is something is also affecting your countries. So in this context, I would like to ask you two things. One is to reflect or to ponder what has happened in your countries and how the conflict is affecting your societies. That is a reflection on the present. And second, despite profound differences in your societies, how do you see the role of literature in safeguarding culture, protecting the cultural heritage, and creating the conditions for a tolerant debate? Well, you will have 7 to 8 minutes each, and we will start now with Andrei to the first kick in this conversation. Please, Andrei.
Well, I hoped that ladies are always first, but the topic is not so soft and not so easy to talk about. Ukraine suffered a lot in the Soviet time in the cultural sense when real Ukrainian culture was suppressed. And I want to mention that the latest Ukrainian poet to die because of his poetry in the Soviet Union in camp in prison was Vasil Stus in 1985. That late. He was from Donetsk. He wrote in Ukrainian. He graduated from Ukrainian Donetsk University, State University. And after Ukraine became independent, with lots of problems and opposition, a plaque was put at the entrance of the university where he studied. Once Donetsk was taken over by separatists and Russians, this plaque was destroyed. And this is, I think, the typical attitude to everything Ukrainian from the side of Russian Empire or Soviet Empire. Ukrainian writers never wanted to be Soviets, and those who became Soviets, they were immediately cancelled in 1991. I think actually to cancel the culture, we can actually say that sometimes actually it happens in a positive sense. Ideologically correct pro-communist literature nobody read was not needed in New Ukraine. And so, I mean, these people were forgotten, and the people who died because they were trying to recreate, reconstruct, restart Ukrainian culture, they are remembered, but most of them had tragical destinies. I mean, the whole generation of Ukrainian writers, poets, playwrights, theater directors, they were first given carte blanche in 1920s to create Ukrainian literature, and then because of this they were all arrested and they were sent to camps, Sandarmoh and other camps, and most of them died. So actually Ukraine lost the whole literature, and Ukraine lost 50 years of development of its own culture. What we have now, I mean, one of the first victims of this war was a Ukrainian translator from ancient Greek who translated Aristotle into Ukrainian, and Alexander Kisluk, he was killed in Bucha in front of his house. I don't know the reason why. I mean, I don't know if the soldier who killed him knew that he was killing the translator, but I mean, the Russian army doesn't care what they kill, and the Russian artillery doesn't care what they destroy. Now we have actually dozens of museums and theaters destroyed, and actually I was thinking that cultural rights is not only about literature, about museums. Actually, it's about cultural landscape in which the nation lives. Because when somebody comes and actually paints the name of your town in concrete letters, paints with the flag of other country, it means actually your cultural landscape is already destroyed. You are told that you are not at home. And I mean, sitting here, I cannot ignore the thoughts that actually about what happened in Mariupol with the theater, where people, I mean, this is like a theater, and people were hiding there from the bombing. I mean, theater was in Mariupol the center of cultural life. And in one moment, in spite of the big letters, children, written on both sides on asphalt of this theater, the pilots of Russian bombers dropped bombs and destroyed actually the Ukrainians, the cultural symbol of their city. And in a way, actually, I mean, they tried to erase anything Ukrainian in Mariupol by doing this. Yeah, right. So, I mean, literature is important, will be important, but during the war it is rarely read and rarely written. I mean, people are writing during the war almost in hiding. I mean, they hide inside themselves. They write diaries, essays. Poetry is surviving. I mean, poetry is the remedy for a poet and for the readers. But fiction will be written about this war after the war is over. And fiction will actually keep the memory of the war. And it will be done probably over 100 years, because one of the best novels about the First World War was written only 100 years after the war by Pierre Lemaitre in France. Goodbye Those in the Heaven. I don't remember the exact title in English, but I mean, Ukrainian writers and Ukrainian intellectuals are doing a lot, documenting everything what is happening and documenting about everything what is lost. And we lost not only artifacts from the museums, which were stolen by Russia, from Melitopol Museum, the gold of Scythian gold, Kuinji paintings from Melitopol, Kuinji Museum, etc. I mean, the destroyed museum of Maria Primachenko, the naive artist from near Kiev, and Grigory Skovoroda, the best philosopher and the most interested figure in the history of Ukrainian philosophy and literature. I mean, lots of things are burned down, and they cannot be probably returned because some of them were not digitalized. So, I mean, here the literature will have a task to replace real with fantasy, with reconstruction, with work of imagination. And it's still better than nothing. It's better than the black hole where something was shown to the Ukrainian people. So Ukrainian writers have to do a lot. And I mean, they are now involved in other things. I mean, they are fighting on the front. They are collecting money, raising money actually to buy not weapons, but for example, pickup trucks, and to take them old pickup trucks from Europe to the front lines. And it is done by many writers, actually. Famous Ukrainian writer Sergei Zhadan is doing this, Andrei Lyubka, and many others. Ukrainian writers are also helping other writers who are refugees, but they are also involved in all kinds of humanitarian actions. And actually, when the need for these actions is over, they will go back to their computers. And I want maybe to finish with one thing. Next to Bucha, not far away from Bucha, there is a village Borodyanka, which is a town now. I remember it was a village, where Russians came, actually, I think on the third day of the war, and they killed a lot of young people and didn't allow the locals to remove the bodies from this town. But what they did also, in the center of Borodyanka, there is a monument to national Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. And somebody was shooting from Kalashnikov into Shevchenko's head, and this monument with holes, bullet holes in the head. I mean, they probably are making or creating the best image, the best explanation of attitude of Russia towards Ukrainian history, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian literature, and Ukrainian identity. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andrei, for your testimony. Certainly, that increases our sense of solidarity with your country, knowing more about the real situation. Now I would like to ask Niloufer to intervene, and you told me that this was the first time you were speaking, but please feel free to speak and to think that and feel that this is your family, these are your friends.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy and glad to be here and to talk here, although this is my first time. I'm so much glad. In particular, so while we want to talk about Afghanistan, I came from a country where girls are not allowed to go to school nowadays. And this is very much difficult. We are suffering still in Afghanistan. We are not in a post-conflict situation. Still we are suffering. We are enduring conflict situation. For example, I want to talk about, we have a celebration for New Year, at the first day of New Year. It's called Nowruz, but unfortunately, this year people were forbidden to celebrate this celebration day because it was a cultural celebration and it was against the rule of the government that now we are having in Afghanistan. And this is the thing that shows we are facing difficulties in social acceptance and mutual respect between the government and the people. They are not respecting the culture that in Afghanistan we have. So if we don't have cultural acceptance, then it's very much difficult for the people to live there. I don't want to talk very much about my own experience. I just want to call it as a trauma. And when you're traumatized, you don't want to talk personally about that, but I want to talk in general about Afghanistan and what is happening in Afghanistan. Cultural rights are human rights. They are the most significant components in one's life. But everyone have the right to participate in their culture of selection, to perform their cultural activities without being discriminated, with full dignity and equality, which is unfortunately not existed in Afghanistan now. And this is a very huge problem now. And also, how can pen centers help in this situation? If I precisely talk about Afghanistan, this is very much difficult. We are facing now there is non-existence of freedom of speech and also censorship in literature and freedom of speech. We are facing a lot of problems, but by designing and organizing different activities, such as, for example, literary events, cultural events, literary criticism, and also in order to change the people's mindset, because literature is the thing that can change people's mindsets, alter them into the best version of them. Because while they study literature and literary books, so that is the time that they can accept different people, different ideas, because we are not the same. For example, how I see this class is different from the perspective of yours. We don't have the same perspectives. We look at things from different views. We have different ideas. Nobody is allowed to force their ideas on others, which is now happening in Afghanistan, and it's not acceptable. And this is the biggest problem. But when people study literature and they understand that we are living in a diverse world, we have to accept diversity. We have to accept different cultures. We have to have social acceptance. When they understand that they can live better. For example, if we compare European countries, for example, I want to compare this with Afghanistan. If we compare European countries, let's say Norway with Afghanistan, what is the biggest difference? In Norway, they have accepted different cultures. They are a multicultural country. They don't have problem with being a Muslim and performing Hajj or Ramadan. There's not a problem. And also, but in Afghanistan, you cannot do that, because we are facing with non-existence of social acceptance and mutual understanding between people. And this is the work of literature, to promote this and to protect this by organizing literary events, literary criticism, and also affecting on social media and mass media. Also, I want to end my statements by this sentence: literature never dies indeed. It's neither a miracle nor a constitution. It's something that has come into existence from people, for people, within people. Despite First World War, still we are able to feel the magical touch of Gone with the Wind. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nilofer. It's it's interesting to get more acquainted with the situation in your country, especially when at least in my case, living in a country so far away, the possibilities of having fresh information is not that easy. And I also would like to take from your statement this fact of that peace is not only the absence of war. The lack of peace is also expressed in the situations of what we call post-conflict, but they are ongoing conflicts, and that's something that we have to reflect on that situation. Well, Andrea Ležić, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I come from Pen, Bosnia-Herzegovina. I wasn't in Bosnia during the war, which lasted between 1992 to 1995, but I observed what was going on because my parents were there and friends were there. And now that I'm back in Bosnia since 2007, I've been able to closely watch what's happening afterwards. So one simple kind of historical note, that the war in Bosnia didn't end because anybody won, but simply because the international community put pressure on all the foreign actors in particular who were taking part in it to simply stop it. So the war was stopped, the country was divided up, And if the war is continuation of politics by other means, what we have now is the continuation of war by political means. It also means that the causes of the war, the ethnic divisions and nationalisms, were never really resolved. They continue, and they're still the dominant political discourse. It also means that still, and we have elections on Sunday, it's pretty much the same political parties that were there at the beginning of the 1990s. And there is no alternative political framework through which we can see the problems that we have. And the problems that we have are mostly poverty, destruction of the commons, destruction of anything that is shared, and the destruction and misuse of natural resources. But there is no political option that would address these things. And I think also the problem with, when we were discussing what we were going to talk about, I said the literature in my part of the world, and I mean former Yugoslavia in general, was never innocent. It was used to build nations, but it was also used to construct nationalist discourses. So it was never something that was only used for positive or peace-loving or the other-loving reasons. It was very often used to foster hatred of the other, to remember all enmities and so on. So it's the question of also these cultural rights. It also means in Bosnia now that the three dominant constitutive nations, their rights are fairly well protected. There are organizations, there are institutions, there are sort of political frameworks that work to protect those. What is not protected and is anything that we might have in common. So very practically, say the National Museum of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is in Sarajevo and suffered greatly during the war, until a few years ago, did not have any funding. The doors were shut most of the time, particularly in the winter because there was no heating. The same applies to the National and University Library, which was burned down during the war by Serbian shelling, which is, of course, a problem. Some books were saved, but it's not anymore a war problem. It's now a post-war problem that library still does not have a home. And from what I gather, since I work at university, that home will be provided by Saudi Arabia at some point, which will be fun. So the question of what we have now is these three ethnic groups who are very well provided for in terms of various also foreign actors helping them foster their national identity, but it's very difficult to maintain dialogue. There's no, and to maintain a common space, a shared space. And I think that the way we see current kind of management of Bosnian Pen, we see our role as simply that shared space. And I'm pretty sure that all of us are very willing to talk to anybody who will talk to us, and we are willing to talk to anybody who is willing also to accept an offer of a dialogue. And one of the things that I've also noticed generally in former Yugoslav space, there is this division really between people who are willing to talk to each other and people who are willing to talk only amongst themselves. And what often happens is that the dialogue between different groups is based on who is willing to criticize their own side. And then they're very easily accepted by others. But then that creates this kind of vicious loop of the more you criticize your own group, of your own community, your own country, your own ethnic or national identity, the more willing the other countries are to welcome you. But then your own people hate you more. I mean, if there is this, there's several examples I can give. I mean, in Bosnia, there's Marko Vešović that I talked to, my friend from Montenegrin Pen about. In Serbia, there's Petar Luković, who is a journalist, who is completely persona non grata in Belgrade, but is welcomed with open arms in both Bosnia and Croatia, because he's very critical of Serbian nationalism. And this, I think, happens on all three sides. And so I think that the problem we have is that the war ended 27 years ago and we're still talking about it. And that is not good. That is really troubling. And also I think what happened, the wartime literature that was written, that was very interesting, it was very creative, somehow it was even some fantasy literature that was written during the war, and had this sense of diversity in terms of themes and approaches to even war themes. But since then, almost everything that is written in Bosnia is still about the war, is still the sort of literature of testimony or literature of personal experience and remembering. And it's become more and more, I'm going to say cliched, predictable, desperate and hopeless. And that is another huge problem. I'm starting to become a great promoter of science fiction in Bosnia because I feel we really need to get out of this attachment to hopelessness that is surrounding us in real life.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. You are a real teacher, not only of literary theory. Now the floor is yours, Haider.
Yeah, hello everyone. Before I start sharing my experience, I want to tell that this chair is very comfortable. You can come here anytime. There's water here, too much light. And definitely I have a presentation. Hopefully it will be ready soon. But during my fellow speakers talking, I'm thinking about how many wars I lived in my 33 years. This is my age. So it's 5 wars, starting from Iraqi-Iranian in 80s, and then the Gulf War in 90s, and 2003, the US occupation on Iraq, and then 2004 and 6, and the Civil War, and in 2014 with ISIS. This is the classical war, let's say. We are still on ongoing war, and the shape of war is different now. The new name of wars, it's hate speech. The name of wars now, it's disinformation. And to prove that, we lost friends because of their tweets. We lost friends because of their voices in the streets. Tweets like Hisham al-Hashimi, he's a journalist and a political analyst, lost his life in Baghdad because he just shared the truth on Twitter. Dr. Riham Yaqub, a strong women voice from Basra in south of Iraq, lost her life because she encouraged women to raise their voices in south of Basra. So that's not a classical war, but that's a war against civic spaces. So the civic spaces in Iraq, it's shrinking. And the damage that could happen in the historical side, it might digitalize before this damage, or maybe it can return, but who is building the souls that is damaged inside? I don't have even time to heal from the trauma that we have. Imagine my father who raised me, and he's already traumatized because he went to 8 wars. I mean 5. My father's 8 wars back from 50s. So imagine generation of traumatized people who is living, and some people, they are taking action based on uneducated, no knowledge, no strong education, wrong information, especially after 2003. The internet helped to spread the disinformation, allowed many things, and the control of militias and religious groups on several sites. So first sight, it's important not because of the title, because the social media down there, you can follow. I'm trying to take this opportunity to promote for the social media handles for the center. So decades of neglect and sanction and conflicts, including factors such as US occupation and ISIS, have taken a heavy toll on Iraqi culture heritage. Mesopotamia, Iraq, it's a unique place, as you know. It has been an inspiration for humans for a long time. The concept of time, math, the wheels, sailboats, maps, and writing were innovated. Iraq's cultural heritage, which includes historical sites and artifacts, as well as intangible tradition, has been degraded by conflict since 2003. However, you know that, and Iraq becomes maybe a boring story on media because of the conflicts and the war. So when my colleague, Mr. Uthman, mentioned the quotation about no one can hear your suffer, it's really represent me. Because, as I said, we are a boring title now in the news. That's okay. Where is the new? If you go to Iraq, to the Google, and you put Iraq, you will not see that heritage. You will see only wars. And also, who took this responsibility, not us only, but also the technology who involved by designing a bias algorithm who controlling that hate speech against our culture. That's why we see if someone posted a dog face, it will get a lot of engagement, but if you host a famous writer, you will see less engagement on social media. However, cultural resources have been divided between religious and political elite in Iraq, aiming to enlarge their presence and rules. So the manipulation here of Iraqi cultural heritage is designed not only to legitimize political and religious groups, but ultimately to reshape Iraq itself in line with the priority of post-2003 religious and ethno-nationalist interest. And that's very clear now if we see that the biggest religious groups taking control here, and you will see the minorities where is the heavy damage there. The long closure of Iraqi Museum and the Sulaimaniya Museum, and I mentioned these two because this is the two biggest museums in Iraq, the largest one. And the limited public engagement activities are a prime factor for the low visitors numbers and limited cultural heritage awareness in the population. So imagine you go to the museum, they will say, we are closed at 12 o'clock. They open only 3 hours. They don't open in weekends. So when the new generation, especially kids, they will have opportunity to go and discover. They meant to do that because they don't want them to know that. That's why when we saw a lot of bloggers who they interest to discover Iraq, when they feel there is a little bit of peace or space, they go and discover things about Iraq and Iraqis, delicious food, the generosity there, free everything. You can live there without paying any money, even hosting. So this is nothing new for us, but it's new for the people who is coming. They don't know anything about Iraq, coming from outside. People, the religious groups and the militia groups, scared about this movement of bloggers coming from outside because they see this is open mind of people. They are trying to see Iraqis, they are not familiar with tourism and people coming from outside. So when they see different colors, hair, skin, eyes, different language, different culture, they engage because they want to know who's that person in front of them. Especially, we have the second worst passport, so we don't have even opportunity to travel and discover other countries, despite the financial, if we have money to travel. Obstacles to preventing the respect and protection and realization of the culture rights. So here I will talk a little bit about business involvement here and the developers on the historical sites. So major concern is the practice of non-transparent tendering, that a procedure for building and conservation and renovation projects in Iraq, which enables companies without certification and quality standards to work in this field. Together with a lack of supervision, this situation often causes serious damage to architecture heritage. My last slide here, I want to mention that generalized violence has damaged and traumatized the Iraqi society. With particularly, I want to mention heavy damage and impact on non-dominated or minority cultural, religious, and ethnic groups. And thank you for this opportunity. Shukran.
Well, thank you, Haider, for your presentation. And since we are doing quite reasonable with the time, let me have now a more free conversation, I would say, on the role of writers. That was one of the things that were proposed to you in this panel. But not simply as writers. I would like to ask you your reflection on, we are pen writers. So my question would be, how can pen use literature to promote greater understanding and tolerance towards social cohesion and sustaining peace? That's very important in my view. Please, any one of you would like to speak, to start on this? Please.
Well, as I mentioned before, as a member of PEN, we have designed and organized different activities and also courses of events, such as literary events, literary criticism events, and literary exhibitions. And we've invited authors and poets to read their poems, to be criticized, and the poems and also the stories. We invited people into the gatherings to come, not only the scholars or writers. We've invited common people in order to join the programs and see and look and have the view of acceptance. So I think this is one of the activities or the courses of activities that can help in promoting and safeguarding of literature.
Thank you.
Well, Ukrainian PEN actually has two audiences for which PEN works. The audience outside Ukraine, for which actually PEN is sharing information about everything what is happening in Ukraine. We run dialogues about war on Facebook, videos, and on YouTube. And in these dialogues with Ukrainian authors, members and non-members of PEN, we have wonderful international authors like Orhan Pamuk, Margaret Atwood, Philip Sands, and many others. And inside Ukraine, I mean, our duty is to try to support tolerance, and it is not easy in the time when the society is radicalized. And many intellectuals are looking for enemies inside their own society and not outside. So we deal with it as much as we can. I cannot say that we are 100% successful, but we will go to the very end. And I hope actually after the war it will be much easier to calm down the most excited and the most radicalized intellectuals and to bring them into harmony with the rest of the society and with the rest of intellectual groups. Yeah. but also Ukrainian Pen is organizing discussions and debates all around Ukraine, including Kharkiv. Recently, Ukrainian writers went 2 or 3 times to Kharkiv to have debates, meetings, and to Kharkiv region. And actually, I think during the last trip, they were almost under Russian shelling. They had to escape very quickly from the reach of Russian artillery. So this is also a battlefield. I mean, the literature is battlefield, but the work with the audience, the work with the society, and promotion of the literature and of new ideas, even in the wartime, is quite a challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrei. Andrea?
Well, I think for us, maybe being asked about things that are not just the war from the rest of the world might be helpful, and helping with the creation of those shared spaces. I mean, one of the things that simply in terms of literature, just to give an example of what I mean by that hardening of particular type of traumatized discourse. During the war, Nenad Veličković, who is a Sarajevo writer and a good friend, wrote a little book called Sarajevo Gastronauts, and it's a little book of essays about the food that came into Sarajevo in humanitarian packets. It's a book that was written out of hunger, and it's absolutely hilarious. It's a very funny book, which imagines a world where food will be abundant and healthy and organically grown and these sorts of things. So it's a wartime book that was written out of hunger, and it's very hopeful, very pessimistic, very optimistic, and very funny. And then 20 years later, another writer and another friend whose poem I read yesterday, I barged into the reading and read it. And she has a poem in which she basically says, that she buys too much food, eats it all, eats every piece of stale bread, and with it feeds the little girl who heard her mother say to her father that there's only flour for 1 or 2 days left. So what was, this physical experience of hunger in wartime, when there was a sense that when the war ends, things will be better, was optimistic and funny and hopeful. 20 years later, with the cultural and political situation, which is hopeless, is turned into this ongoing bodily trauma of still being afraid of being hungry. And I think helping people to overcome that is something that would be quite helpful.
Thanks, Andrea. Haider?
Yeah, in short answer, I want to mention 2 points. First of all, focusing our centers on young generation to come and lead, the centers and teach them, especially having some special programs for kids. It's very important because the way I'm right now, it's because of a local civil society back in 2004, when randomly picked people, students from the school, and I was one of them, introduced me into the human rights world and to this civic war. So if I'm not selected back in 2004, maybe I will be a normal guy, not active in the community. So that's why if we increase a lot of opportunities and targeting more kids, especially not in the cities, outside the cities, in rural areas where they don't have even connection to the internet to see what's happening in the world. So that's important. Second thing, it's digital media literacy. That's very important to to produce more about content about digital media literacy, educated people how they read the news, because everything, even social media companies, they have their propaganda based on the algorithm, what they want to push, what they want to censor, like what's happening in Palestine as an example, a full censorship on Palestinian content. So that's why if we educated people how to read the news, how to do a fact checking for everyone, then I think we will have a strong community, and definitely literature will be always a reminder that literature brings peoples together, not dividing them.
Thank you, Heather. Well, we are still a few minutes. I would like to end this discussion with a final round of interventions. We are all writers. We are all people committed with human rights. And it was so nice to see this bag prepared by the Swedish pen, where the pen charter is reminded to us. My question to you is, because, excuse me, all of us, we have been facing conflicts and having opponents to our own thinking. Are you ready to pardon your opponents? Are you ready for being tolerant and to follow in some way the spirit of Pen Charter? Andrea?
Yes. I mean, I'm actually in a weird position in Bosnia because I'm mixed ethnic origin. My mother is a Serb from Serbia, my father is a Croat from Croatia, and I live in Sarajevo, which is majority Bosniak Muslim. So I kind of don't belong to anybody in many ways, and I'm perfectly happy with where I am. And I find that actually the people I sort of have the most fruitful conversations with are the people to whose ethnic group I don't belong. One, I think, problem that we're, I think, all still learning to overcome is to forgive other people their own hatreds towards us. And I think that, you know, after 27 years, we should really be all doing that. And I'm trying to do it myself, and I'm trying to get our pen to do it too.
Thank you, Andrea. Niloufer?
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, my question was, are you ready to pardon people that think in a different way that you think in your country? I'm referring to the situation in Afghanistan.
As I mentioned, if I talk personally about myself, it's like a trauma. So when a person or a group of people caused you a trauma, so you'll not be able to forgive them easily. If I personally talk about myself, I've never forget and I've never forgave those people who what have done to my country and to myself. Never.
Thank you. Andrei?
Well, it depends. It depends if the people who are wrong, not from my point of view, but from the moral stand, repent and say that they were wrong, then I am happy to forgive them. Actually, I had the idea that, I mean, the most peaceful people in the world are writers. If everybody was a writer, there would be no war, but there would be no readers either.
Heide?
I mean, it's easy maybe to say yes, but when it comes to the reality, when it's happened, then it will be difficult, especially if it's something happened to you, as you mentioned. It's difficult, I mean, but it's always, I mean, it takes a lot of braveness, let's say, to take action and, you know, forgive people who caused that pain. And it's not, it's a long-term pain in you and your family. So I think there's always space to talk. But are they honest? That's the problem. Are they honest in this action so you can give them the space? That's the question that could be. I mean, that question always need to be asked the other people who cause pain because we are the victims here.
Thanks a lot, Heide, for your reply. Well, I think that we are not only united by the fact that we are writers and we are pen writers, but we are also united for the fact of having faced a traumatic experience, the five of us. And I put this question because it's something that I've been debated for 50 years with myself. And for me, it's difficult to say that I pardon them because of what they did, because I was able to survive in the middle of a situation that was horrendous. But I think that at the end, it's important to emphasize the fact that we belong to the human race in a way. To the humanity is what unites us, and we have to push always for the feeling that we have a role to play. We have to be given. We're supposed to give testimony of the things that happen and are happening in our countries, and that's very important. I think that I'm inspired in a way by Primo Levi, an Italian writer who he wrote a lot of beautiful books, beautiful in the sense of the creation, but he was describing horrendous situations that he faced during the Second World War. And he decided to commit suicide many years after, when he believed that his time for testimony was over. I hope that our times for testimony will be not over until the end of our lives. And I would like to end this conversation based on what Siri was saying yesterday. For us, a luta continua. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Writers, they never give the answers. They only just add to our doubts. Thank you. That was very important conversation. And just reminded about the dialogues on war we are running. And once we had a chat with one really established writer before the episode. And I mentioned, you know, all the Ukrainian writers just turned out to be volunteers right now. And she said, no, we are volunteers. We used to be volunteers. We are volunteers of spirit. And this is our mission.
Dear audience, dear delegates, this concludes this part of the final public program for today. And for those of you who are in Uppsala, I would like to mention that we have a couple of events later downtown, and they are in different venues around the city.
At 6 p.m. there will be a release of the anthology, the book release of Pan-Op anthology under Ukraine Open Sky at Akademie Bokhandeln. I've done that.
Yes. At the same time, there is a conversation at the English bookshop with Siri Hustvedt, Ola Larsmo, and Stina Björkelid. That is fully booked, unfortunately, but lucky for you all, there's still available seats at a wonderful play at the Regina Theatre, based on the poet Darin Tatour from Palestine, on her work and life. She is currently an icon writer in Östersund, and I really recommend that you go see the play at the Regina Theatre. And with your badges, there's a free entrance. There's limited seating, but be there early, and I'm sure you will get a seat.
And we will close this evening for today. Yes. There's still such a lot happening tomorrow with a literary program arranged by Swedish Pen and Pen Belarus at the City Theatre, with, among others, Kristina Bandurina, Yulia Timofeeva, Dmitry Strotsev, and Tatiana Yazbay. This is not to be missed.
And that is 8:30 this evening. I think that will be wonderful. So warmly welcome, free entrance. I think we can gather a couple of hundreds at the foyer where we'll be, so everyone will get a place, right?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Hope to see you tonight. That's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.